All right, before we go on with these, I want to show you what this looks like on Desmos. So we're going to pop over to Desmos and take a look at this. So you can see I have graphed the sine function here. Notice it starts at the origin, just like we said, and it takes 2 pi or 360 degrees to get through a full cycle. So up, hits halfway, and then back. Now, we can adjust the amplitude of this. Okay, so if I make my amplitude bigger, notice that makes it higher and lower, how far it's going. And then if the amplitude becomes negative, then it reflects. So instead of starting on its upward slope, it starts on this downward slope. Okay, but that's what we can do with playing with the amplitude. Now, if we adjust the period of this, that adjusts how long it takes to get through a full cycle. Okay, so here you can see it takes till you go up and back only 1.5 to get through a full cycle, and I can make that even smaller or bigger. Okay, so that's what it means to adjust the period. Now, if we take a look at cosine, let me get these back to where they were. Well, not quite. Cosine starts as its crest, and it takes a full cycle to get to the next crest. I adjusted the amplitude for that. That's why it's not 1. And we can adjust the amplitude for these. And then if that amplitude becomes negative, it just reflects. So instead of starting at the top, it's starting at the bottom. And then we can do the same thing. We can adjust the period, and it takes a lot less time to get through a full cycle or more time. Okay, so that's what we're really playing with as we're graphing these. So let's take a look at this next one. We want to do sine 1/2 x. We'll do this one in degrees, and then we'll switch back to radians in a bit. So amplitude. Amplitude's the number out here in front, which happens to be a 1. Okay, so that's how high and how low it's going. And the period, remember the period is 360, but we have to divide that by the number that's in front of the x, which in this case is 1/2. So 360 divided by 1/2 is 720 degrees. All right, so let's start graphing this. We know that sine starts at the origin, and it is going to take 720 degrees to get through a full cycle. So I'm going to mark that out here. Okay, so we're going to go up and hit and back in 720 degrees, but we're going to do a lot better than that because that was kind of sloppy. All right, so we have to go up and back. So we're going to hit halfway, and halfway happens to be at 360. And then halfway between those two, so I don't know, 180. That's when we're going to have our top point, which is 1. And then halfway between these two, we'll have our bottom point, which is -1. So that's what the graph of this looks like. And it's going to go the other direction as well. So if you want to do out to -720, we just can do another cycle right there. The domain is all real numbers, and the range is from -1 to 1. All right, let's take a look at this one. Starting with the amplitude. Amplitude is 1/2. That's the number out in front. So that means instead of going all the way up to 1 and -1, we're only 1/2 and -1/2. And the period, remember the normal period is 360, but we have to divide it by the number that's in front of the x. So we're divide by 1/8. And I need a calculator for that because I don't know. 2,880. All right. That's very large. Okay, so let's graph this. We are dealing with a cosine function. The cosine starts at its crest, but remember our crest is not all the way up at 1, it's only at 1/2. And we want to know how long is it going to take to get to the next crest? Well, it's going to take 2,880 degrees, which is crazy. Halfway between those will be at the bottom point down here, so that will happen at 1440 degrees. And then halfway between those two, so at 720 degrees, we'll hit here. And same thing over here. Okay, so this is what that graph looks like, and we can do the same thing in the other direction to negative 2, 8, 80. Kind of fill those points in and just repeat the pattern. Domain is all real numbers, and our range is from negative 1/2 to 1/2. All right, we'll do this last one here in degrees. In radians, because we've done the last couple in degrees. All right, so the amplitude is this number out in front. It's 3. But we've got that negative, which means this whole thing is going to be reflected. So we'll deal with that in just a second. The period is normally 360 or 2 pi, but we have to divide that by the number in front of the x, which is 2. So our period is actually going to be 180 or pi. I don't know what happened to the range. Must have fallen off the page. Okay, so let's talk about this. We're dealing with the sine function. The sine function starts at the origin. Normally it starts on its upward slope, but since we've reflected it, it's going to start on its downward slope, which is okay. The amount of time it takes to get through a full cycle is pi. So we'll be back here at pi. So we have to go down, down and hit, and come up and hit again, all within pi. So I'm going to erase that because I was really sloppy. So we're going to have a point halfway between these at pi over 2. And that's where we're going to hit here. And then halfway between this, so at pi over 4, that's when we're going to get that bottom point down to negative 3. And then at this point, 3 pi over 4 will be at positive 3. So that's what this looks like. And you can do the same thing in the opposite direction. And it'll look like this. A little sloppy there. You get the idea. Domain is all real numbers, and the range for this function is from negative 3 to 3. Okay. In the next lesson, we'll talk about doing vertical shift and horizontal shifts. Those get a little bit more complicated, but hopefully this has given you a good idea. Remember that the amplitude is always this number out in front, and the period is 2 pi or 360 divided by b, which is this number out in front of the x.